A grieving single dad runs a quiet mountain cafe until an elegant stranger sips his coffee and reads a note that shatters her silence. But who is she, and why is she running from a name the world never forgot? If this story stirs something in you, we gently invite you to subscribe. Each tale we tell is a hand on the shoulder, a reminder that kindness still matters. Keep listening, because by the time the last note is read, you'll understand why some loves don't arrive with thunder, but with silence that finally feels like home. It began the day the snow didn't stick to the ground, but clung to people instead. It caught in eyelashes, melted into scarves, and held the coat sleeves like it had chosen to stay, not fall. The kind of snow that seemed more spirit than weather. That morning, the town of Winslow Ridge breathed quietly, as though it too was unsure how to hold the weight of such softness. Eli Mercer unlocked the front door of Mabel's hearth with hands already cold, though he wouldn't admit it. The brass key was worn smooth from years of repetition, from the ghost of his wife's hand turning it before him. The cafe had once belonged to her, Mabel. It still did in spirit and name, even though she'd been gone 5 winters now. The old wooden door creaked just enough to be familiar, and the scent that greeted him, a blend of burnt cinnamon, worn oak, and the faint trace of old books from the shelf beside the counter, was the same every morning. A small ritual of belonging. He moved slowly, not out of fatigue, but reverence, the kind of slowness that only comes when silence is sacred. He turned on one lamp, then another, until warm amber light pooled in corners like sleeping cats. He brewed the first pot of coffee, not for customers, but for memory. Always the same blend, the one Mabel used to call a hug in a cup. He whispered her name aloud just once, as he did every morning. His daughter, Junie, would wake soon. He had 27 minutes, maybe 30 if the wind made her curl deeper into her blankets. He moved through the motions of setting tables, folding napkins, placing 3 wrapped caramels on the counter for the first regulars. One would always pretend not to notice them. One would always say thank you too many times. The third would take 2 and wink. Eli knew them all. They were the only church he still attended. Outside, the wind brushed against the frosted windows, whispering faintly against the glass. Inside, warmth spread from the radiators that had no right to still be working. He reached for Junie's lunchbox and tucked in a sandwich, a small apple, and the note he wrote her each morning. Today's wonder. Why don't snowflakes stick to mittens as long as they do to eyelashes? Love, Dad. He drew a snowflake in the margin. Always a wonder. Always a drawing. She never said anything about them, but she always kept them. By the time the bell above the door chimed its first song of the day, Eli was wiping the last of the flour from his hands. He looked up expecting Mr. Boone or Esther Mallory with her 2 yapping terriers in tow. But it wasn't them. It was her. She stepped in quietly, like she wasn't sure she belonged. Her boots dripped melting snow in small circles near the door, and her coat was too thin for the mountain. Dark auburn hair tucked beneath a knit cap, eyes hidden behind large glasses, and something in the way she held her bag, as if it were more shield than accessory, made Eli pause. She looked around once. Not wide-eyed like tourists did, not nostalgic like folks who'd left and returned. No, she looked around like someone hoping to go unnoticed, but the room noticed her anyway. He said nothing, just nodded once and gestured to the corner booth, his favorite. She hesitated, then sat, pulled her coat tighter, folded her gloves neatly. Eli poured a mug, placed it on a small wooden tray beside a honey biscuit, and brought it over. He didn't ask what she wanted. He didn't need to. She reached for the coffee with a hand that trembled slightly, the way tired people tremble when their minds have run too far ahead. She sipped. Her shoulders fell a fraction. Then she looked at him. Their eyes met only for a moment, but Eli saw it. The flicker. Recognition not of him, but of kindness, of space being made where there was none. "You passing through?" he asked softly. She gave a faint nod. "For now." He nodded back. "Well, for now's as good a time as any." Then he turned away. The exchange ended as simply as it began. She read from a worn paperback she pulled from her bag. Eli caught the title. Collected Poems of Rainer Maria Rilke. She read slowly, mouthing words. She wasn't here for caffeine. She was here for stillness. He recognized a hunger for it. Junie came in through the side door 8:30, cheeks pink from the brisk walk with Mrs. Redland, who lived across the street. She dropped her school bag, beelined to the kitchen, and tugged at Eli's sleeve. "She's new," Junie whispered, eyes wide. Eli nodded. "Is she lost?" "I don't think so." Junie peered around the doorframe and studied the woman. "She looks like a painting someone forgot to hang." Eli didn't answer. Some truths were better left uncommented. By 9, the regulars had come and gone. The woman remained. She'd eaten only half the biscuit and drank all the coffee. When she stood to leave, Eli was wiping down a table. She placed a $10 bill neatly beneath her mug. As she reached the door, he called out, quiet but firm, "Wait." She paused. He walked to the counter, pulled out her bill, folded something inside it, and returned it to her hand. "No change," she said, wary. "It's not that," he replied. She looked at the paper, confused, but tucked it into her coat pocket. Then she stepped out into falling snow and vanished like a flicker of light behind frosted glass. Eli watched the spot where she'd stood, watched the way snow clung to the sidewalk behind her. Then he returned to the kitchen and turned off the back burner, which had been left on too long. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the warmth lingered. It was only when Rowan Vale reached the edge of the woods that she pulled the note from her pocket. Her fingers were stiff from cold, but she unfolded it with care, as if it might fall apart from gentleness denied. It wasn't a receipt. It was a single line, written in simple black ink. "You look like you haven't been truly seen in a long time. You are now." She stopped walking. The wind caught her scarf and whipped it forward, but she didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the page as if it had spoken aloud. For a long moment, the world around her receded. All that remained was the paper in her hand and the strange, unsettling warmth building in her chest. She folded the note again, slower this time, slipped it back into her pocket, looked back over her shoulder at the cafe now barely visible through the snowfall. The cup of coffee had been too hot, the biscuit slightly dry, the room too small for someone like her. And yet she would return, because something in her had been named, and she wasn't ready to let that go. Back in the cafe, Junie tugged at her father's sleeve again. "Is she coming back?" she asked. Eli looked at the door, then at the spot where the snow had melted beneath her boots. "I reckon," he said. He poured a second mug and placed it beside the first, just in case, and the snow kept falling. The next morning, she returned. No words, no grand gesture, just the sound of the bell above the cafe door, sighing into the warm hush of Mabel's hearth. Snowflakes clung to her lashes again, slower this time, as though they'd missed her too. She looked thinner, not in body but in spirit, as if life had drained her with 1,000 slow, invisible pinpricks. Eli saw it. He didn't stare. He just nodded once and gestured toward the same booth. Without a word, she walked to it, set down her bag, and folded her coat over her knees. Her fingers trembled again, but not from cold. Eli brought the same mug, the same honey biscuit. But this time, when he set it down, he said softly, "Today's is on the house." Her eyes flicked to him, unreadable behind the smudge of frost still fading from her glasses. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because it's today." Her lips pressed together like someone in used to kindness, someone who'd once learned that it always comes with a cost. But she accepted it. She accepted the coffee. And for the second time in 2 days, she drank it slowly while reading from the same weathered book of poems. Time passed differently in the cafe. It stretched, settled. Sometimes it held its breath. Around her, the other patrons moved like distant sounds behind a fog window. She stayed until morning slipped into noon, and the wind whispered stronger against the window panes. That became her rhythm. Every day she returned. Always the same booth, always the same coffee. Never her name. She paid in cash and never lingered once she stood. But while she sat, she was present in a way that was nearly sacred. Fully inside herself, but also in the room. A witness to the slow lives unfolding around her, and unknowingly, a part of them. Junie began to draw her. First on napkins, then scraps of paper she kept in her coat pockets. Sketches of a woman with sad eyes and long fingers, always sitting near the window, always holding something close. Eli never told her to stop. He just watched. Some days, the woman would leave small things behind. A pencil, a corner of a map torn just so. Once, a packet of pressed wildflowers tucked between napkins. Each time, Eli set them aside in a drawer he never labeled. One morning it was different. She came in with snow already melting down her sleeves and sat, as always, without speaking. But her face had a crack in it, subtle and sharp. Eli brought her coffee but didn't place it down. Instead, he paused. "You all right?" She looked up at him, and in that single glance, the silence between them deepened. Not a bad silence. Not empty, but thick, pregnant with everything she wasn't saying. "No," she said. He nodded. "Okay." He set the mug down and left a second biscuit beside it, untouched by honey. That day, she didn't open her book. She just sat with her hands folded, watching the steam rise and twist above the rim of the mug, like it was something alive. Junie approached, cautious. She slid a piece of paper across the table. "I drew you," she said, barely above a whisper. The woman blinked, slowly reached for the drawing. It was simple. Crayon lines. A woman sitting near a window, her body small but surrounded by light. There was a sun with a face in the corner, and birds outside the glass. "Thank you," she said. Junie hesitated. "Do you want to keep it?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I do." Junie smiled and scampered off, leaving behind a single green crayon on the edge of the table. The woman held the picture, like it might tear in her hands. Eli watched from behind the counter, not intruding, not needing to. Later, when the woman stood to leave, she hesitated. Then, without quite looking at him, she said, "I'm Rowan." He smiled gently, like he'd already known, but waited for her to give it voice. "Eli," he replied. "That's Junie." "I figured." She lingered by the door. The snow outside had grown thick again, flurries stacking like soft promises along the porch rail. "I liked your note," she said. He didn't say thank you. Just, it was true. And then she left again. That night, Eli sat at the kitchen table while Junie did her homework, the smell of baked apples curling from the oven. He pulled a blank scrap of paper from the drawer and wrote another note. Not a receipt, not a gesture, just a thought that wouldn't let go. "Everyone here thinks you're a mystery. I think you're a song with the words torn out. I'd like to hum along anyway." He folded it and tucked it into his apron. The next morning, she returned. He slipped the note beneath her saucer. She found it 10 minutes later, read it, and stayed another hour. Neither spoke about it. Over the next few days, Rowan changed in small, imperceptible ways. She wore the same coat, but the zipper was repaired. Her boots were polished. She began to hum softly when reading. She asked for a second biscuit once. She said good morning. She also began to draw. Not herself, but the cafe. Little vignettes. Eli at the counter, Junie with her crayons. The warped glass of the front window, refracting sunlight like a prism. She left the sketches folded neatly on her table when she left. Eli began saving them. But the most unexpected change came one evening near closing. The cafe had emptied, and Eli was sweeping when she appeared again, not to sit, but to stand quietly near the door. "I couldn't sleep," she said. He nodded and poured 2 mugs. They sat near the fireplace, not speaking. After a long while, she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you left yourself somewhere years ago, and every day is just trying to remember where?" Eli didn't answer right away. He took a sip of coffee, then replied, "I feel like I live in a place I lost myself. I stay so I don't forget." She closed her eyes. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away with the sleeve of her coat. "I left everything," she said. "My name, my family, all the noise." He didn't ask why, just said, "That takes courage." "No," she whispered. It took desperation. They sat that way, the fire crackling low, the shadows long and forgiving. Junie had already gone to bed upstairs. The cafe was a different world after dark. Less a business, more a sanctuary. Rowan pulled a folded page from her coat and handed it to him. "A sketch," she said, "of your hands. They remind me of anchors." Eli looked at the drawing. It was rough, shaded in charcoal, his hands holding coffee cup. Fingers ringed with age, veins like roots. "I'm not good at portraits," she said. He smiled. "You're better than you think." A silence followed, not empty, but rich. She looked into the fire. "Do you believe some people are meant to be alone?" "No," he said without pause. "I believe some people were alone for so long they forgot how to be found." She turned toward him. "And what if they're not ready to be found?" "Then you wait," Eli said, "and you let them find you." That night, she didn't leave. She curled into the couch by the fire and drifted to sleep, a blanket pulled over her by hands that did not ask for anything in return. In the morning, Junie found them like that. Her father seated in the armchair with a book open in his lap, the woman still curled near the fire, the last embers glowing softly behind her. Junie whispered, "She stayed?" Eli nodded. "She needed somewhere quiet." "Is she going to stay again?" "I don't know," he said honestly. But when Rowan woke, she didn't look afraid. She looked rested. She stood slowly, smoothing her hair, and walked to the window. "It's snowing again," she murmured. Eli joined her. "It does that," he replied, "when it's not ready to let go." She turned to him. "I think I might stay a little longer." And that was enough. Not a promise, not a confession, just a gentle turning of a page in a book neither had finished reading. Outside, the snow whispered down like silence made visible. Inside, the silence gathered too, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a place where something might begin. The thaw came slowly that year. Snow melted in reluctant sheets, sliding off rooftops like sighs too long held. Icicles shrank into teardrops. The road into Winslow Ridge, once lost beneath winter's hush, reappeared in muddy ruts and scattered gravel. But some things did not melt. Some silences, once settled, held fast even as the air warmed. Rowan Vale had stayed, not out of certainty, but because leaving no longer felt like escape. It felt like erasure, and she'd been erased before. By headlines, by men in suits with names that echoed like brands, by the expectations of family that prized legacy over life. But in Eli's cafe, no one asked for her resume. No one asked for anything at all. She began helping in small ways, wiping down tables, refilling napkin holders, sketching signs for the seasonal menu on the chalkboard with quiet flair. Her handwriting was precise, almost architectural. Once, she wrote the daily special as "lavender scone for days when the world hurts too much." Customers smiled without knowing why. Junie grew bolder. She started sitting beside Rowan after school, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes drawing together on the butcher paper Eli kept behind the counter. Rowan never called herself good with kids, but she listened, really listened. And Junie, in turn, shared little pieces of herself like skipping stones across a pond. In the hush between them, something maternal and mutual took root. Eli noticed. He noticed everything, though he spoke little of it. He watched Rowan fold a cloth napkin with reverence, watched her pause before unlocking the register drawer, as if old alarms still rang in her ribs. He never pressed, but he wondered what kind of life left someone so skilled at disappearing. The answer came on a Wednesday. A man entered the cafe around noon. He wore a wool coat too fine for the town, leather gloves with buttons on the cuffs. His eyes scanned the room like a ledger, calculating, cold. Rowan froze mid-step behind the counter. Her entire posture tightened like a rope pulled too hard. "Rowan," the man said. Junie looked up from her seat. Eli paused, spatula in hand. "I thought I might find you here," the man continued, ignoring the room's breathless stillness. "It's been weeks." Rowan said nothing. Her face was unreadable, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled just slightly where they gripped the edge of the counter. "I'm not going back," she said finally. "You don't get to decide that." The man replied with a tone that dripped familiarity and disdain. Eli stepped forward. Not loud, not angry, just present. "She said she's not going back," he said. The man turned. eyed him with the dismissive calculation of someone who measured worth in equity portfolios and nameplates. And you are... Eli didn't blink. Someone who listens when a woman says no. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken warnings. The man looked at Rowan once more, then reached into his coat and placed a business card on the counter. You'll need this when you remember who you are. He turned left, and the door swung shut behind him with finality that echoed through the room. Rowan exhaled shakily. Her shoulders dropped. Her fingers curled around the counter's edge like she needed anchoring. Eli said nothing. He simply picked up the card and slipped it into the trash behind the counter. No fanfare. Just gone. That evening, the cafe closed early. Rowan didn't speak until they sat near the fire, the air between them heavy with the weight of old lives. I used to be someone, she said softly. I don't think you stopped, Eli replied. She looked at him. There was no judgment in his face, just quiet presence. My real name is Rowan Vale, she said. You might have seen it in a headline, or maybe on a stock ticker. I used to run a company, or at least stand still while others did, and I smiled for it. There were meetings and press conferences, a fiancé who smiled like a blade, a father who called me an asset. I walked away from all of it. Why? Eli asked, not intrusively, but with genuine curiosity. Because I didn't want to die inside a glass house. Her voice broke just a little. And because one day I looked in the mirror and saw someone I'd never chosen to become. He let the silence sit, let it breathe. I kept thinking if I just disappeared long enough, she whispered. Maybe I'd come back different. You did, Eli said. You came back as you. Rowan's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded note. The very first one he had given her. I kept it, she said. He took it gently. Read the words he already knew. You look like you haven't been truly seen in a long time. You are now. I read it every night, she confessed. It reminded me that not all people look at you to take. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached into the drawer beneath the counter and handed her something. It was an envelope, sealed but unaddressed. I wrote this the day you left early. After you read my second note. I didn't know if I'd see you again. She opened it. Inside, a letter in Eli's looping script. People disappear for reasons. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's guilt. Sometimes it's because the silence in them finally got louder than the world. But I don't think you're meant to vanish. I think you're meant to return. When you're ready, we'll be here. No questions. No noise. Just us. Tears came then. Quiet and slow, trailing down her face like the melting of long-held frost. I'm ready, she whispered. But I don't know who I am anymore. Eli shook his head gently. You don't have to know. You just have to stay. The next morning, Rowan stayed past noon. She helped Junie with spelling words, wiped down the front windows, and served the customer with a smile so hesitant it felt like a miracle. At lunchtime, she sat with Eli at the corner table. I used to have a life, she said, not wistfully, but with clarity sharpened by distance. A penthouse, a yacht named after my mother, friends who took more than they gave. Eli looked at her. What do you have now? She glanced around. The cafe hummed with quiet life. Junie laughed near the window with a puzzle. A local man in a flannel coat read the newspaper upside down. She turned back to Eli. Something I want to keep. They need to say more. But Junie had something to say. That evening, after Rowan helped clean up and turned to leave, Junie ran up and pressed a folded drawing into her hand. It was crude but heartfelt. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of the cafe. The sign read Mabel's Hearth. The tallest wore a hat like Eli's. The middle one had Rowan's long hair. The smallest held a crayon. I don't care what your name is, Junie said. Just don't go away. Rowan knelt down slowly. Her voice trembled. Okay. Junie threw her arms around her. Rowan froze for half a second, then melted into the hug, like someone stepping into warmth after too long in the cold. Eli stood by the counter, eyes damp, hands in his apron pockets. Later that night, Rowan didn't go to her rented room. She stayed, made tea, sat on the floor, while Junie fell asleep curled beside her like a kitten. Eli watched from the doorway. "Do you want to leave the light on?" he asked. "No," Rowan said softly, "but thank you for asking." He turned to go, but she stopped him. "Eli." He turned. "If I forget who I am again, would you remind me?" He stepped forward, took her hand. "You never left. You just got quiet." Outside, the moon rose over the ridge, silver and solemn. Inside, warm bloomed in the spaces that used to echo. And for the first time in years, Rowan Vale didn't feel like a ghost haunting her own life. She felt like someone who had finally come home. Spring settled into Winslow Ridge like a hymn sung under breath, quiet, reverent, and full of grace. The snow had vanished entirely now, save for stubborn shadows along the northern slopes. In its place came green, soft and tentative at first, then boldly breaking through earth and branch. Rain followed, not in torrents, but in gentle showers that kissed the roof of Mabel's hearth and made the window glass shimmer like old lantern light. Rowan stayed. She stopped counting days. The calendar above the register flipped forward on its own rhythm, but she no longer marked her time by weeks or names. Her world had shrunk and expanded all at once, to the size of a little cafe, a curious child, and a man who never asked for more than she could give. And somehow, in that smallness, she found something vast. She swept the floor now without being asked, knew how to refill the coffee grounds before Eli reached for them, dried Junie's watercolor paintings on the clothesline behind the cafe. She still wore the same coat, though the zipper worked now, and she'd sewn a bright blue patch onto the elbow. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about keeping what mattered and mending what could be mended. She'd never said aloud, but she stopped being Rowan Vale, the billionaire's daughter, a long time ago. Eli never pressed. He let her unfold at her own pace, like a note written slowly in a hand learning to trust again. Their closeness grew not in declarations, but in repetition. Quiet mornings with shared glances. Evening walks where words weren't necessary. A ritual of leaving a mug of chamomile tea for her on the back step after sunset. She'd begun leaving him small notes in return. Folded paper tucked behind coffee filters. Beneath the biscuit tin. Short things. One read, "I found a feather in my boot today and smiled. You'd understand." Another, "Your silence is the first place I ever felt safe." Eli kept them all. Junie thrived under the change. She began calling Rowan her almost mama, and Rowan didn't correct her. One day she even whispered, when she thought no one was listening, "I hope it becomes real someday." Rowan's breath caught, but she didn't run. She placed a hand on the girl's head and said, "Me too." The town noticed, in that gentle way small towns do. Murmurs, soft smiles, a chair left open for Rowan at potlucks. No one asked where she came from anymore. They only asked if she'd be singing at the next fall gathering, now that they'd heard her humming during cleanup. And still the past lingered, not as a threat, but as a weight slowly being set down. It was late one night when Rowan found the final note. She'd been reorganizing a shelf behind the counter, moving jars of cinnamon and clove, dusting the corners where cobwebs spun stories no one had time to read. Behind the last row of books, she found a worn library novel Eli had once loaned her, a romance with creased pages and a pressed wildflower in chapter 12. Inside the cover, folded carefully, was a piece of parchment in Eli's handwriting. It was never about the coffee, or the notes, or even the silence. It was about someone finally seeing you and choosing not to flinch. She didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, she pressed the note to her chest and stood there, still as breath. Outside, the wind moved through budding trees. Inside, the cafe felt like a cathedral. She turned to find Eli watching her from the kitchen doorway. His sleeves were rolled up, flower on one wrist. He said nothing. "I want a new name," she said, her voice low. He tilted his head. "New name? Not Vale. Not the one I walked away from. Something we make together. Something earned." Eli crossed the room slowly. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, then cradled her jaw with a gentleness born of long absence. "What should we call you?" he asked. She looked up at him, her eyes full but steady. "Home." He didn't kiss her yet. Not then. Instead, he drew her close and let their foreheads rest together, the space between them quiet and whole. And in that stillness, something clicked into place. Not a beginning, not an ending, but the center of a story already in motion. Later that week, she officially moved into the upstairs room beside Junie's. She brought Lou with her, just a suitcase of clothes, a few sketchbooks, and one silver locket she never opened. Junie helped decorate, stringing handmade paper stars across the window and writing "Welcome Home" in green crayon on the door. They planted herbs in the cafe garden, basil, mint, rosemary, and Rowan made chalk labels for each one. She gave them names too. Basil was Gladys, mint became Eloise, and rosemary, quite predictably, was Mabel. Life moved on in small, beautiful beats. One morning, Rowan caught Eli staring at her across the kitchen as she sang softly while kneading bread. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked. He smiled. "Nothing. Just this. This is a note at the end." She stilled, palm still pressed into dough. "What do you mean?" "I've been writing it in my head for years. A letter I never thought I'd get to send. But you're here now. You read it every day." She didn't reply, just wiped her hands, crossed to him, and kissed him on the mouth like something certain, something quietly true. It was soft. No fireworks. Just the comfort of something finally arriving. Afterward, she whispered, "I never knew I could feel like this and not be afraid." "You don't have to be," he replied. They kissed again, slower this time, and the air between them held like a closing page. Later that night, as the wind picked up and rain patted against the glass, Rowan tucked Junie in and sat her bedside a while. The little girl held her hand and mumbled sleepily, "If I ever get lost, will you find me?" Rowan brushed a curl from her forehead. "Every time." Junie drifted off, and Rowan stayed there, watching her breathe, memorizing the rhythm. Downstairs, Eli wrote a final note. Not to Rowan, to himself. He tucked it into the back of his old ledger. Some love is built from wildfire. Ours was built from ashes, from staying, from waiting, from every ordinary morning made holy by presence. This is what redemption looks like. Not forgiveness, but finding something worth beginning again for. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, the lights dimmed one by one. They sat on the porch the next morning, the three of them, Rowan with her sketchbook, Junie with her stars, Eli with his quiet hands resting on the arms of his chair. Birds flitted through the trees. The old sign creaked on its hinges. Mabel's hearth, home found here. The words had never meant more. And as the breeze turned warm and the sky peeled open like a promise, Rowan Vale, no longer lost, no longer alone, reached across and held Eli's hand in both of hers. No words, no vows, just the truth held quietly between them. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.